Did Jesus bring the law of Moses to an end? Some modern teachers would have you believe that he did, but in Matthew 5:17, Jesus commanded us not even to think that he came to do that. He announced that he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. As we learned in our previous video, this statement meant that he did not come to invalidate the law's authority, but rather came to teach and demonstrate the correct way to obey the law. This statement alone is sufficient to dismiss any claims that Jesus did away with the law, but he doesn't stop there. In the next verse, he goes on to declare that the whole Torah will remain as long as heaven and earth exist. In other words, it won't be going away anytime soon. In this video, we will delve into the significance of Jesus' statement that nothing will pass from the law until heaven and earth pass away, and until all is accomplished. We interrupt this program to bring you this important message. I, David Wilber, have written a new book. But this isn't just any book. It's a deep dive into what Jesus meant when he said he came to fulfill the law. Spoiler alert, fulfilling the law doesn't mean shredding it like a government conspiracy.
Whoa, that sounds amazing, but why is this book relevant to me?
Great question. The insights you'll gain from this book will teach you the secrets of the universe, reveal the location of the Ark of the Covenant, and teach you how to write the perfect love song to win over your crush. Okay, not really, but you will learn about Jesus' perspective on the law of Moses and how his followers should relate to it. This knowledge will help you win many debates with your antinomian acquaintance from high school who comments on all your Facebook posts. Seriously, this book is packed with extensive research and citations that will fill the hearts of Bible nerds worldwide. Gain a solid grasp of this passage and build a firm foundation upon the rock. No, not Dwayne Johnson, though he's definitely more solid than your typical antinomian arguments. It's time to set the record straight about how Jesus fulfilled the law. Order your copy today. The smallest details of the law remain. In Matthew 5:18, Jesus says, "For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished." According to this verse, the smallest details of the Torah are essential, and not a single letter will pass away until a future time. That is, until heaven and earth pass away, and until all is accomplished. According to New Testament scholar David Turner, these two temporal clauses are, quote, essentially synonymous references to the end of the present world and the beginning of the eschaton. Until that time, the law is valid. Scripture elsewhere describes the end of the present world as heaven and earth passing away and as God establishing a new heaven and new earth. Peter wrote that, quote, the heavens and earth that now exist are stored up for fire, being kept until the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly, and that, quote, we are waiting for a new heaven and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. He further states that, quote, the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away. Similarly, in his vision of the New Jerusalem, John states that the present heaven and earth will pass away and be replaced by a new heaven and a new earth. In a passage reminiscent of Matthew 5:18, the first-century Jewish teacher Philo also taught that the whole Torah would remain, quote, as long as the sun and the moon and the whole heaven and the whole world shall endure. Jesus' original listeners would have understood his point clearly. The entire law remains binding until God establishes a new heaven and earth after the present fallen world has completely passed away. As Turner writes, quote, it would be hard to make a stronger statement of the ongoing authority of the Torah than that made in Matthew 5:18. In contrast to this reading, some interpret the second temporal clause in Matthew 5:18, that is, until all is accomplished, as referring to the Messiah's death and resurrection. According to this interpretation, Jesus states that the law of Moses will remain in effect only until he completes his work on the cross, after which it should be discarded. As Andy Stanley remarks, quote, according to Jesus, nothing in the law would disappear until everything was accomplished. Once it was accomplished, however, the law would begin to disappear, which is exactly what happened. R.L. Solberg echoes Stanley, arguing that all was already accomplished at the cross. Quote, Jesus taught that not an iota or a dot shall pass from the law until all is accomplished, and then he taught that all had been accomplished. The Mosaic law was always intended to be temporary, its divine expiration date was the arrival of Jesus. However, is this a plausible interpretation of Matthew 5:18? Was Jesus really implying that the Torah would remain in effect only until he finished his work on the cross? Not according to New Testament scholars. Craig Keener says that the interpretation proposed by Stanley and Solberg, quote, violates the whole thrust of the passage. J. Andrew Overman similarly remarks, quote, such hermeneutical gymnastics seem excessive, if not tortured. The most obvious problem with the interpretation proposed by Stanley and Solberg is that it results in contradictions. As Donald Hagner points out, interpreting the second clause as a reference to the moment Christ accomplished his work on the cross, quote, plainly contradicts the meaning of the first clause, which refers to the ongoing validity of the law until the end of the age. A second problem with their interpretation of Matthew 5:18 is that it contradicts Matthew 5:17. As David Sim explains, quote, if the Matthean Jesus claims in Matthew 5:18 that the law does become invalid with his death or resurrection, then he obviously did come to abolish the law, and this is a patent contradiction of what he says in the preceding verse. Finally, a third problem with their interpretation is that it is inconsistent with Matthew 5:19. It seems strange that Jesus would warn his followers against disregarding the commandments and strongly emphasize the importance of obeying and teaching them if the law was about to reach its expiration date. Considering the significant problems with interpreting the second clause until all is accomplished as being a reference to the Messiah's death and resurrection, it is more appropriate to view it as synonymous with the first clause, until heaven and earth pass away. Thus, when Jesus states that nothing will pass from the law until all is accomplished, he means that nothing will pass from the law, quote, until the consummation of the kingdom, when heaven and earth pass away. This implies that the Torah in its entirety, even the least commandment, remains in force. But have things already passed from the law? Despite the straightforward reading of Matthew 5:18, R.L. Solberg insists that Jesus could not have meant what he said in this verse. He writes, quote, Jesus could not have meant there would be no change in the law until heaven and earth pass away. Why does Solberg think that Jesus could not have meant what he said here? Well, Solberg rejects the notion that the Torah will endure until heaven and earth pass away because, as he puts it, quote, some things have already passed from the law. Solberg then goes on to mention a few examples of commandments that he believes have already passed from the law based on how he interprets certain passages in Hebrews and Paul's epistles. In other words, Solberg approaches Matthew 5:18 with a predetermined conclusion about what the text is allowed to say. Since Jesus, quote, could not have meant that the Torah will remain binding until heaven and earth pass away, as he said, Solberg has to resort to changing Jesus' words to make Matthew 5:18 say something different, and that's what he does. Solberg writes, quote, Jesus meant something like, the following statement shall remain true until heaven and earth pass away. Nothing will pass from the law until all is accomplished. It is my contention that drawing a conclusion about Matthew 5:18 from unrelated passages and then modifying the text of Matthew 5:18 to fit your presuppositions is not a sound interpretive approach. Shouldn't we instead seek to understand Matthew 5:18 for what it actually says within its own context? That seems like a more responsible way to handle Scripture. Nevertheless, there is indeed more to the Bible than Matthew 5:18, and we must take all Scripture into consideration as we build our theology. When it comes to harmonizing seemingly conflicting passages, however, I would propose that a better approach is to prioritize clearer passages over ambiguous passages. In this case, Matthew 5:17-20 is an example of a clear passage. As Overman writes, quote, although this passage is the subject of lively controversy, it is unambiguous and does indeed command obedience to the whole Torah. In contrast, the passages that Solberg uses to support his conclusion are more complex and prone to misinterpretation. Hence, if we aim to reconcile these passages, the clear text of Matthew 5:18 should serve as our reference point while examining the more ambiguous texts in Hebrews and Paul's epistles, rather than using the ambiguous text to interpret Matthew 5:18 as Solberg does. In the appendix of my short book, How Jesus Fulfilled the Law, I offer an alternative interpretation of the passages that Solberg uses to argue that certain commandments have passed from the law. I demonstrate that the antinomian reading of those passages is erroneous and that a pronomian reading is more consistent not only with a straightforward interpretation of Matthew 5:18, but also with the context of each of those passages on their own. However, for our current purposes in this video, I will simply state that the antinomian readings of unrelated passages should not be used to distort the clear meaning of Matthew 5:18. Conclusion. In Matthew 5:18, Jesus states that nothing will pass from the law until heaven and earth pass away and all is accomplished, which means that nothing will pass from the law until the end of the present world. While some have argued that until all is accomplished refers to the Messiah's death and resurrection, the text precludes this option because 1. It would cause the second part of verse 18 to contradict the first part, 2. It would cause verse 18 to contradict verse 17, and 3. Such an interpretation is inconsistent with verse 19. Hence, the second clause in verse 18, until all is accomplished, should be viewed as synonymous with the first clause, until heaven and earth pass away. According to Jesus, as long as heaven and earth exist, the whole Torah will remain binding. In our next video, we will be going through Matthew 5:19 and looking at Jesus' warning against disregarding the commandments, as well as his call to be great in the kingdom by doing and teaching the commandments. I hope to see you there. And by the way, if you are interested in further study on this passage, consider getting my short book, How Jesus Fulfilled the Law, a pronomian pocket guide to Matthew 5:17 through 20. Until next time, blessings and shalom. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to see more content like this, I want to invite you to subscribe to my channel. Also, don't forget to hit that little bell so that you'll be notified when new videos like this are released. One last thing, be sure to connect with me on my website, davidwilber.com. There, you can find a ton of free resources like articles and videos, learn more about the books that I've written, and subscribe to my newsletter to ensure you never miss an update. Again, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.